So that was probably, you know, 2 to 3 months in, that was already down. So I'm not sure where John Cope would have gone in that sense.
No, I agree with you. Fabulous track.
But I believe that I just got this memory of us having some rough old demo thing that we dumped onto tape and then built the track around it. We didn't do it right from scratch.
It's a really good rough old demo-y thing for sure.
Well, on I Believe in You, when we recorded the drums, see, the other thing Mark had all the time, which as a sound engineer, I mean, I eventually got it, I understood what he was talking about, but initially he'd record something and go, sounds too good. And I never really got it at the time. It's like, well, it could be from a musician's performance was too good, it could be the sound was too good. And on I Believe in You, the drum track was down, and that was put together by editing on the 2-inch tape with a razor blade. And then Mark said, sounds too good, you know. We need to degrade the sound. And because everything had to be done in the kind of analog world rather than using somewhere, we didn't have plugins then, but you know, we could have done it in a different way. We actually copied the drums across the 24-track machine, because each time you copied it, it lost a bit of quality. So we did that, and I think number 7 was the one that we then used. Okay, that's the drum sound. But it was, you know, this was all the stuff that was going on in Mark's head, really. Because definitely Lee and I never thought of like, well, you know, that sounds a bit too crisp or a bit too clean. Let's, you know, let's F it up, you know. And it was always Mark saying, sounds too good.
Thank you.
Gentlemen there.
I've always been intrigued about how the song was mixed. Was it looking for performance?
No, I mean, it's weird that.
Sorry, would you mind just for so that everyone can hear,
yes.
just repeat the question?
About how they were mixed. It was
about how the songs were mixed.
Whether it was a performance. This is going to sound really a little extreme, but we spent so long, you know, sitting in front of this SSL that when we dialed up a song, like put up such and such, after 3, 4, 5 months, Tim and I could put the shape of the faders. It's going to sound crazy. We could put the shape of the faders up on the desk before we'd heard anything, because we were so used to the pattern of that particular, the look of that particular song. So, because you've got to remember, you're in the dark and you've got this oil projector making everything move. So all you can see really are the silver faders. And so Tim would be, you know, he always sat on my left, he would, you know, do his end, I'd do my end. So we'd have our 48 channels of playback, and then we'd put the record, you know, play the tape, and then just make a few fine adjustments. It was like, okay, yeah, a bit down on that, a dB here too, but you know, we could put it up without even hearing it, which is madness, but it just shows you how long we sat in front of that desk. And on Laughingstock, again, after the flood, which has over 100 tracks of analog, we managed to mix that in 3 hours, purely because we put up the shape and we were 98% right, and that last couple of hours was just
My favourite notes on the Spirit Beat is the guitar on the intro, with that loud guitar.
Yeah.
That one note. Was the fader raised for that?
No, everything's, I mean, it's all natural. What Mark and I came to this thing early on, which got emphasised through the next 2 albums really, but we had this theory that you turn the mics up as loud as you get them before you got noise from the mic amp. Turn everything up really loud and then play as quiet as you can. So that particular guitar you're talking about is that Mark's playing lightly and just catches with his nail one note which leaps right out because everything is cranked. So most of those records are made with everything turned up really loud, but everyone playing as quiet as they can.
We'll be asking you in the extended web series, note by note, how you achieved the sound of Spirit Beat, Phill. Gentleman there.
Okay, yeah, going slightly, completely off beam here, but Phill, I'm a Talk fan from the very early days, from the synth pop days, and loved them from then and all the way through. The original EMI demos were produced by Jimmy Miller, who was mentioned earlier, who you worked with at one point. Did you work on those demos?
No, I never had anything to do with Talk Talk until Spirit of Eden. I mean, well, I tell a lie, you know, emotionally I fell in love with Colour of Spring. I just thought it was a remarkable record. It was my kind of album of that year. And I went and saw them at the Hammersmith Odeon, and it just blew me away. I mean, and that's why when I did meet Tim by chance and said to him, you know, congratulations on the album, and you know, that's the kind of band I should be working with. And you've got to remember, this is me at a fairly low ebb because I hadn't worked and I was about to leave the business, and I was thinking, why can't I work with a band like that? But I had nothing to do with them whatsoever. My Jimmy Miller work was back in the 60s with the Stones and with Traffic. But it doesn't surprise me that Mark would get Jimmy in because of Jimmy's connection with Traffic. And he was a unique kind of producer because he was all energy.
Well, apparently he said he's my fucking hero,
yeah,
when he was suggested to Clive Black at EMI Music. Yeah.
He was one of mine. I mean, he was a vibe merchant. You know, there's producers cover many different fields. You know, those that are technically there, those that kind of engineer and produce it themselves, those that co-write the songs. You know, but Jimmy Miller was a vibe merchant. So he was a tall guy from Texas, and he would come in, and from my experience around Beggar's Banquet and also the Traffic stuff, he would set up such a vibe that you'd think to yourself, you know, where would I rather be than here? You know what I mean? And he got everyone feeling like that. And then he'd almost sit, you know, Glyn John's engineering, so he got good people, got a great studio, great engineer, and then he'd almost just sit back and let people do what they do, but all the time going, yeah, that's fucking great, you know. He was wonderful. I mean, I spent most of my time with him after the sessions playing table tennis because he was a big table tennis fan, and he was so, you know, hyped up from doing a session that when everyone else was left,
Yeah, and also from some other things. as well.
Just from doing the session.
when he was, you know, when everyone else left, he would always be like, oh, let's have half an hour game, you know. But I loved him. He was such a genuinely lovely guy, and I loved his productions. But he was all about raw energy.
The second part of my question was going to be, was there any connection between you getting the engineering gig and Jimmy Miller, which I think you just answered?
I think my connection getting the gig was probably more the fact that I'd worked with Traffic, and I also did a solo album with Steve Winwood, his first solo album. But I think it was more the fact that I'd worked with Traffic, and I did albums with Chris Wood and with Jim Capaldi and Winwood. So I was in that kind of camp on various albums. But I think it's because I did pretty much all of the second Traffic album. Traffic, I think it's just called Traffic 2. But I think that probably was much more important to Mark than the fact that I'd worked with, you know, all the listed names of people. And he was a great fan of reggae and all of that, but he didn't really, you know, mean as much. I think the fact that, you know, Traffic was the thing. Even Jimmy Miller, I don't think he even knew I'd worked with Jimmy Miller, as far as I know.
That line, he's my back in here, made me think of my favourite personal quote from Mark in the book, which is, Bartok was a great geezer. You can read all about that when the time comes. Let's take 2 more questions. Yes, just in the glasses there.
Obviously, it's a very long album to record. What sort of hours did you keep that? Because was it all, because it was dark inside, and you write in daylight?
No, we were doing 11 a.m. till midnight every day. So we would come in, and Betty would bring us a cup of tea, and then the lights would go out, and it would be like that until we left. When we did Laughing Stock, same process, but we did a lot of that during the winter months. So, and I by then was living in London, but you'd get up, it'd be dark, you know, anyway. And I only had to walk across one street to get to the studio. So good exercise in those days. But it was already fairly dark outside, and then you'd step in and turn out the lights. So, and on Spirit of Eden, we did actually work Monday to Friday, but because of the interruptions that we had, because say our mics were wide open so we could hear the schoolgirls next door in the playground, we could hear phones ringing in offices, and it really used to piss Mark off, you know. So when we did Laughing Stock, we had our weekend on a Wednesday and a Thursday, and we worked for Saturday and Sunday, which were quiet. So we did at least make one. We couldn't close the school, so we did change our working hours. But no, we never did kind of 18-hour days that were popular in the 70s. We did a kind of 12, 13-hour day.
And I bet you didn't tell any of the pupils where their contribution would be put on the album either. Lady at the back, who had a question just now, yes. Anything from the sessions you took into your later work?
Yeah, I think, like I said, I wasn't joking when I said it kind of changed my life. I think anyone that was heavily involved, it had a big effect, whether positive or negative for some people. But yeah, I think I did, because it suddenly seemed to make a lot of the whole music process, or making record process, just seem so unimportant and a bit tacky somehow, you know, when you've been through that and you see the result. So I stopped using as many mics on my drums. I mic'd things much further away, because we mic'd things like 6 feet away, and we just kept pushing the boundaries. So when we did, you know, Spirit of Eden was done with 4 mics and 2 contacts, which are contact mics that you stick on the toms. We had a Neumann head, which is a 3-dimensional, it's basically like your head was the drum kit. And then when we did Laughing Stock, we just used 1 mic on the drums, you know, and everything was mic'd 12 feet away, 15 feet away. The drums were 28 feet away. And it all seemed, you know, you might think it's really simple, like, well, 1 mic on the drums, 28 feet away, how easy is that? What I never thought of, or Tim, was that everything that Lee played was delayed 28 milliseconds while it got to the mic. So we couldn't feed that mic to any of the musicians, or even to Lee, because it was all out of time. So we then had to mic closely to feed the musicians or to feed Lee, but we weren't recording that. And what we were recording, no one was listening to. So it's just, that's all this whole thing of it just does your head in. But I think I took a lot away in the sense of miking things from a distance. I stopped miking things as close. I gave more air, because I learnt that on those albums of just, I was always into kind of air. I did a project with John Martin where we recorded across a lake, and I loved this kind of open air thing. But because
I thought he was more of a fan of more sort of solid air.
But yeah, I think I did change my approach, and also I was starting to work with people that had tracked me down because of those albums, so they were open to work, you know, a different way. But I never went back to seeing sessions as being so straight ahead, I think, after that. I mean, it was really Laughing Stock that did the damage for me. Spirit of Eden was probably more damaging for Paul. Laughing Stock definitely damaging for Lee. And then when we came to do Mark's solo album, we just used 2 mics to record everybody. And we had a big 80-channel desk, and we just had 2 mics. And they were never touched for 6 months. So we would have to place people in the room where you wanted them on the stereo. So if you wanted somebody on the right, they had to stand on the right. They had to stand at the back and all of this thing. And we marked the floor with their name so that they, you know, we knew where they were supposed to be when they came in each day. But that way, if something was a bit like your comment about the guitar sound, if something was loud, it was loud, you know, because it was loud. But if something was quiet, it was quiet. And we just kept that as a way of working. And strangely, when we came to do the vocal for the Mark solo album, I thought we'd just get back to use 1 mic now, because we're just doing the vocal. And he said, no, it's got, you know, we've got to use the same 2 mics. So if you ever listen on headphones, he had this tendency to move his head to the left when he sang. So if you listen on headphones, you can hear his voice moving slightly to the left.
It's fascinating. Should we take one more question and then move
this
to...
guy here, he's been trying.
Just wonder if I get some clarity. You're obviously an engineer, but as you say, some producers are engineers. Is there a definite demarcation of what you did on the album? Or could you say, did people afterwards headhunt you more as an engineer because you were a producer?
I've always made it very clear I was the engineer. The thing is, the two things can be very closely combined. You know, I have produced records and engineered and produced, as it were. But I've always considered, I started Olympic in '67 and my training was to be a sound recording engineer. And I still regard myself as that. Although I've produced records, I still think of myself as an engineer. And I made it very clear to all the people that tracked me down that I was the engineer. It says it on the cover, you know, so it's not too difficult. Tim was originally an engineer who became a producer. So Tim had the ability to engineer if he wanted to, but he didn't really want to. So Tim would always sit back and let someone else do it. He had no interest really in engineering, but he did originally come from an engineer. Most producers do now, you know, in the last 40 years. I mean, different to maybe the Shel Tamis and the Jimmy Millers and that, who never had any engineering experience. They just set themselves up as producers. But things have, you know, Mickey Most is another, but that's a different era. That's kind of mono recordings, 4-track recordings.
It's interesting that your trajectory from tape op, which you were at Olympic, moving on to engineer, similar to Tim's tape op at Wessex, moving on to engineer, moving on to producer, and yet, of course, where he started, I think Betty was still the tea lady, right, when he was a tape op.
Yeah.
So he kind of was almost like going, his alma mater, is that right expression? It's almost like going home for him.
Yeah.
You know, and the piano used there was the one that he bought in 1975 that I think Freddie Mercury used on Night of the Opera, is that right?
Right, but the thing is, although they had a beautiful, full grand Bosendorfer at Wessex, but Mark said it sounded too good. So we actually rented in a more standard piano, you know, just a regular piano. That it is beautiful, but it isn't the Bosendorfer. And we also, you know, took the lid off and threw a mic over a beam like this and just hung the mic, it's all one mic stuff, just hung the mic over the piano, and that was our piano sound. And one thing which might be a good time to point out, just so you understand the kind of some of the technicalities of this, because we had a lot of trouble with EMI over the being technically competent album. We had to recall everything that we were doing. So every mic, we would take the serial number of that mic. It would be measured from 3 different places, so we knew we could get it back into exactly the same place. We would register the humidity in the room and the temperature and air conditioning, so that if, and it happened a few times with Mark, he would come in 2 months later and say, I just want to put one piano note on such and such a track. And you'd have to, and it sounds like it'd be easy if you're not using much EQ. You put the mic up, you've got to wait for the temperature of the room to get back to what it was, the humidity, because all this has such an effect. And then once everything's back as it was, you hope it's right, then you record that one note in the rest of the piano. And we did that for every instrument that we recorded. So there was, the recalls were like this. It was like a manual of recalls, which the assistant, thank God, it was his job, not mine. But again, back to love stuff, but Sean, who did Spirit of Eden, was just amazing. He was like my shadow, and he was clocking everything and writing down everything. And the guy that did Laughingstock was 18 years old. It was his first big project as a tape op, and it destroyed him. After that album, he left the business. So sad that he had 1 year, but it just destroyed him. He couldn't understand the level of what we were doing and the mathematics when you've got these slave machines that you're offsetting. And again, it was quite involved, because negative offsets, you actually add time to take off time. It just does your head in. And if you got it wrong, and Sean, this guy a couple of times did, it wouldn't be like, oh no, shit, man, it would be an explosion sometimes from Mark or Tim. And like we've said before, the C word, and the, you know, all you've done is just done your maths wrong. And you've been doing that all day and getting it right. And then there's one that you get wrong, and it's like, you know, and it just destroys people. So that's why they were kind of tough. I mean, I was not on the receiving end of too much of that, but the recalls were really, the drum, you know, the temperature of the room was massively important, because the drums, with this 28 millisecond delay, if the room was really cold and dry, if we'd left the air conditioning on, that might be 24 milliseconds. But if the room had heated up, and especially if it got really humid, it might be 30 milliseconds. So every day when we came in, we would have to work out what our delay would be. So there were all these little things going on in the background that in a way had nothing to do with the record, but had to be done before we could even do the record. And all of that was logged.
Was Mark aware of this of these ramifications? Was Mark aware of the ramifications of these requests?
I think so. I mean, when we had to detune Maureen, because it was, you know, he wanted it a semitone down.
He just said he was going off to the football.
Yeah.
And left you to it.
These days, that's easy, you know.
But it took you how long?
It took us 3 days.
3 days.
But the thing was, he wanted it detuned to semitone, and it's easy, you know, you slow the tape down, it goes down in tuning, and he said, no, I want the tempo to be exactly the same, I just want it in a different key. And that in 1987 was really involved. And plus, it wasn't just one machine, you know, we had, you know, 48 tracks of analog and a 32, we had to do it to every track. So, you know, we worked out with Tim and I was immediately, well, the only thing that we can use is this digital harmonizer, which some instruments detuned very well, others it would give a glitch. So we had to bounce basically to another track, each instrument, one by one, taken down a semitone, and it would glitch every 2 or 3, 4 seconds. So we would literally go back and drop in and keep dropping in every 2 or 3, 4 seconds, each track. So Mark, when he asked us to do it, he said, I'm just going to, you know, I think he thought it'd take 3 hours. He said, I'm just going to go up to the football at Highbury. And we went, cool, you know. And he went, and Tim and I took it in turns, because we could not concentrate more than about 20 minutes at a time when you're dropping in. So we would do like 20 minutes, and then he'd take over, and then you know, we just kept doing that 12 hours for 3 days. And Mark stopped, he didn't bother coming in, he would just phone in and say, how are we doing, you know. And we'd say, well, we're halfway through, you know. And then he'd come back and let's do it at the end. And it wasn't like, well, you know, again, this communication, it wasn't like, fantastic, well done, guys, it's great, let's move on. I've got an idea for, and off you go.
For those people who've yet to hear Spirit of Eden,
please tell me you're still
please don't go home. It's good.
Well, there you go, Mark Hollis, classic Arsenal fan.
One there.
All right, last question.
It sounds like very strenuous work, and thanks for doing it so well. For me, it's a masterpiece of selection and editing as well. Were there also glimpses early on of how special the recording and influential an album is to be?
Good question, we'll give you that.
It's a tricky one, that, because I've worked on some things that I just thought were so fantastic, and they died a death and no one ever heard them. And I worked on other things that I was embarrassed and just wanted to get out of the room, and they were number ones. I'm not an A&R.
Tight Fit, are you talking about Tight Fit? Also produced by Tim Freeze Green, pop fans.
I've never been good at knowing that, and I don't think you do at the time, you know. You're making a record, it's kind of a job, it's what you do. You're trying to do it as best as you can and deal with people, because that's part of an engineering job. It's not the technical side, it's dealing with personalities and the changing environment. But I don't think I've finished a couple of things and gone, wow, I think that's absolutely fantastic, you know. But that doesn't mean it'll be successful. And I think with Spirit of Eden, by the time I finished it, I mean, I tell you a quick aside, this will sum it up really. So I lived a lot in London while I was making the record. I would turn up at weekends, but I took Spirit of Eden home, and my kids were probably you know, 14 and 11 or something like that. And so I sat my wife and them down, turned out all the lights and put on Spirit of Eden. I said, I just want you to hear what I've been doing for the last year. And they sat there, beautiful children, they sat there quietly, listened to this, and then, you know, finished the album, lights went up, they went off to do their homework. And my wife turned around to me and said, if you ever work with that band again, you move out.
Phill Brown, everybody. And Ben Wardle. Thank you so much for joining us and for offering both your brilliant insights into various aspects of this amazing band and career and album. We're going to take a break for 15 minutes, 20 minutes?
Yeah, let's say 20 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes,
15
depending
to 20
on
minutes.
visits to the loo and that sort of thing, yeah.
Don't go far, we're going to be playing the album complete with oil projector as soon as we get back. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thanks very much.